Pinot Brown, that's at Chance Boulevard. Has the situation between the Falcons and Kirk Cousins changed any? Odds Kirk stays with the Falcons through October. If you're talking about has it changed any over the last month, yes. If you're talking has it changed any over the last week or two, no. Pino, I would say really the way you want to look at this is there were 3 deadlines as Kirk Cousins camp saw it coming into the offseason. The first deadline was when his $10 million roster bonus for 2026 vested as fully guaranteed. That was over the weekend of St. Patrick's Day, back in the middle of March. So once you got past that date, his full guarantee, the full guarantee in his contract went from the $90 million that he has in the first 2 years of his contract to $100 million to include $10 million for next year. So that materially changes the equation in that after the Falcons got past that point, the chances that they were going to cut him basically were ground down to 0. There was some feeling maybe he gets cut when they came out of the season. Once you get past that first checkpoint, the chances of him being cut, which is what he wanted, which is what he asked for when he first went in there, essentially died. The second checkpoint was draft weekend. Why is that a checkpoint? Well, it was a checkpoint because once you got past that first deadline and the communication between Kirk and the Falcons picked up again, Kirk basically informed the team that he didn't want to be traded again until the draft. Why? Well, he didn't want to be in a situation again like he was in 2024, where he signed with the Falcons and then 6 weeks later, they take Michael Penix with the 8th overall pick. So he wanted to see how the draft played out. You could argue at that point he overplayed his hand because there were teams like the Browns that had to take care of their own quarterback situations that maybe were less interested in waiting and wanted to take care of what they could take care of in the here and the now. And so that was a conscious choice by Kirk Cousins, not wanting to go to another place where he'd be a placeholder. Fine. So then when you get to draft weekend, what ends up happening after the first night of the draft, maybe the first 2 nights, but the first night of the draft, really, to get past that first night of the draft, things start to clarify as far as depth charts with teams, where there are really openings, where there aren't openings. And then the third checkpoint in this whole thing is the beginning of training camp, which is when Kirk Cousins has to show up to avoid incurring massive fines, which is really for players when they're locking in for the season and it's go time. And so we got through that first checkpoint. The Falcons wouldn't cut him. We got through the second checkpoint, and now there are very limited opportunities out there, which is part of the dice roll that Cousins took. Really, if you look at it, I think there's just one team that's still out there without what they feel like is their starting quarterback on their roster. That's the Steelers, who are still locked in on Aaron Rodgers. Maybe an opportunity comes up there going forward. But that's where the material change happened. The last material change happened was over draft weekend when, okay, Kirk Cousins is not going to enact his no trade clause if you can find a place for him. The problem is finding a place for him. And because the draft went the way that it went, there aren't too many opportunities out there for him to go and be a starting quarterback somewhere else right now. So that leaves him on the Falcons roster. The next time that he has to be there, the last time that he has to be in-house with the Falcons is for their veteran minicamp in 2 weeks. I would expect that he will show up for that to incur fines. But like a lot of people have said over the course of the last couple months, like as long as he's in the Falcons, he's probably going to do the bare minimum. And that's where he's at right now. And this is a weird one now because is there a possibility that things fall through with the Steelers and the Steelers are suddenly interested in trading for Kirk Cousins? Sure. Is there a possibility that there's an injury somewhere? Of course there is. That opens up the possibility for him to start somewhere else. That could happen. It's not likely. It doesn't happen every year that way, but it certainly could happen. But really this situation now is kind of in a spot where both the Falcons and Kirk Cousins are waiting for someone to get desperate. And so for the Falcons, that would be the opportunity that they've been looking up for all along, where somebody is willing to take on a sizable chunk of the money. The Falcons' unwillingness to take on a big chunk of the money to buy back a draft pick is part of what prevented a deal from happening here in the first place. So they need somebody to get desperate enough to want to do that. The Cousins camp and Cousins himself needs somebody to be desperate to go and get a starting quarterback. And whether or not that happens, again, we have no idea. Here's the other wild card is once you get to the 3rd week of August, the 4th week of August, if you get into the season and maybe there is an injury somewhere, is Kirk Cousins necessarily willing to go? His family's rooted in Atlanta. His wife is from Georgia. Does he want to pick up and go, or does it have to be an ideal situation for him to sign up for, whatever it is, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks of playing in a different city, maybe away from his family, when he could just sit there in Atlanta and wait to see how things play out there, and then likely hit free agency in 2025 or 2026. It is, again, a very complicated situation. I don't think things have materially changed over the last week or so. But getting past the draft, I think, did get you past that second checkpoint. The third checkpoint, again, is the beginning of training camp. And I think there's a fair question to be asked on whether or not this is the right thing for the Falcons starting quarterback. Michael Penix is sitting there in a position as a young quarterback who probably is going to have to go through some bumps early on, like every young quarterback essentially does. And what's that going to look like when he's got the guy he replaced sitting there in the room with him? What's that going to look like if he has a bad 3 or 4 week stretch in September and the Falcons have Kirk Cousins sitting there available to them to be their starting quarterback? It's a really interesting, again, complicated situation. We'll see what happens next.